Welcome to Soul Stories, your home for heart-touching tales of love, hope, and second chances. If you believe in the power of kindness and the magic of unexpected connections, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing family. Now let's begin today's story. The clinking of crystal glasses blended with low murmurs in the elegant dining room of Le Ciel, the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan. Evelyn Carter moved through the dining area with habitual grace, balancing a tray of champagne flutes while her eyes scanned the room, seeking empty plates or a raised hand. Her black uniform was fitted and neat, but her sharp hazel eyes, always watchful, hinted at a mind that didn't quite belong in this role. At 29, Evelyn was older than most of her fellow waitstaff, and though they often teased her for her uncanny calm, they respected her too. Evelyn didn't just wait tables. She anticipated needs, remembered guests' preferences, and handled every situation with near supernatural composure. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed more than usual. A group of VIPs, tech moguls, had booked the private dining section, their laughter and business chatter spilling past the velvet ropes. Evelyn heard enough to gather that the guest of honor was Julian West, the elusive CEO of West, a company synonymous with cutting-edge AI and ruthless ambition. She didn't care for the details. Her focus was making sure the evening ran flawlessly. A spilled drink or forgotten dish could cost her the tips she desperately needed. Her mother's hospital bill was due again, and the thought tightened her chest. Evelyn had once been a rising star in linguistics, a graduate student at Columbia with a gift for Mandarin and French. But when her mother's cancer returned, she gave it all up, her studies, her dreams, her savings, to care for her. Now, 3 years later, she was here, serving overpriced wine to men who spent more on dinner than she made in a month. "Table 12 needs another bottle of Chateau Lafite 98, whispered Claire, the floor manager, as she passed by. Evelyn nodded, adjusted her tray, and headed to the wine cellar. Her phone buzzed in the apron pocket, but she ignored it. Personal calls were strictly forbidden during shifts. That was the restaurant's rule. She retrieved the bottle, uncorked it with practiced precision, and returned to the VIP area, now thick with the tension of wealth and influence. Julian West sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding even in silence. He was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps mid-30s, with slicked-back black hair and eyes that seemed to analyze everything they landed on. His tailored suit clung perfectly to his frame, and though he offered polite smiles to his companions, there was an iciness to him, a wall that kept people at a distance. Evelyn poured the wine carefully, avoiding his gaze. She'd learned long ago that men like him never noticed women like her. As she stepped back, her phone buzzed again, this time more insistently. She glanced at Claire, who was busy charming a guest, then slipped behind a column to check the screen. The name May blinked with a string of frantic messages. "Evelyn, I'm stuck at JFK. Customs is holding me. They don't speak Chinese, and I don't understand what's happening. Please help me." Evelyn's stomach sank. May, her friend from graduate school, was always a bit reckless, jetting around the world chasing art deals. But this sounded serious. Evelyn hesitated, finger hovering over the call button. The restaurant was in full swing. She couldn't just walk away. But then May sent a voice message, her voice trembling. "Evie, they're saying something about my visa. I'm scared." Evelyn looked around. The VIP table was engrossed in a heated debate about stock valuations. Claire was still occupied. Evelyn ducked into the narrow hallway by the kitchen, pressed her phone to her ear, and answered in a hushed tone. "May, it's me. Stay calm. I'll help." May's words came in rapid-fire Mandarin, panicked and breathless. Evelyn responded in the same language, her tone steady as she asked for details. Soon May handed the phone to a customs officer who spoke only English and sounded annoyed. Evelyn became the bridge, translating May's explanation about an art shipment and her visa status. She kept her voice low, aware of the clattering staff nearby. But her focus was razor-sharp. She clarified dates, referenced vague regulations she remembered from a past translation job, and even threw in a polite request for leniency. After 10 tense minutes, the customs officer relented, agreeing to release May with a warning. Evelyn exhaled, her shoulders dropping. "You're okay now," she told May in Mandarin. "Get some rest. Call me later." She hung up, slipped her phone back into her pocket, and smoothed her apron. The entire exchange had taken less than 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. She stepped back into the dining room, heart still pounding, and resumed her duties. No one seemed to notice her brief disappearance, except perhaps the man at the head of the VIP table. Julian West's gaze flicked over her as she passed by, his expression unreadable. Evelyn didn't linger. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, and smiled through the rest of her shift, though exhaustion gnawed at her bones. When the restaurant finally emptied and the last guest departed, it was well past midnight. She counted her tips, decent but not enough to cover the latest hospital invoice, and headed home to her small Brooklyn apartment, unaware that a storm had just begun to brew. Julian West leaned back in his chair, the chatter around him fading into meaningless noise. He wasn't here to socialize. He was here to observe, to identify weaknesses in those who claimed to be allies. 3 years ago, a deal with a Chinese tech firm had cost him $200 million and a friendship he'd thought unbreakable. That betrayal had hardened him. Trust had become ash in his mouth. Now every word, every glance was a potential threat. He'd noticed the waitress from the start, not because she stood out, but because she didn't. She moved with silent efficiency, her expression calm even when berated by a guest. Her name tag read Evelyn, and though he hadn't meant to eavesdrop, he'd caught snippets of her conversation when she slipped away. Fluent Mandarin, so fluent it startled him. His jaw clenched when he heard phrases like shipment and customs. To others, it might seem harmless. To Julian, it was a red flag. He knew this game. Corporate spies often wore innocent masks. Servers, drivers, janitors. He'd seen it before. Her composure only made him more suspicious. Why would a waitress at Le Ciel speak Mandarin like a native? And why would she take a call mid-shift, whispering about customs and shipments? By the time dessert was served, Julian had made up his mind. He signaled the restaurant owner, a business contact, and spoke quietly. The waitress, Evelyn, she's a risk. Fire her. The owner nodded, accustomed to Julian's influence. Julian didn't offer explanations. He never did. He finished his wine, left a generous tip, and stepped into the Manhattan night, his thoughts already on the next issue. He didn't give Evelyn another thought. Not then. But his decision would soon draw them both into a collision neither could have foreseen. Evelyn arrived home at 2 a.m., her feet aching and her head heavy. She checked her phone one last time, hoping for a thank you from May. Instead, there was only a message from Claire. Be at the restaurant by 9 a.m. We need to talk. Her heart sank. She knew that tone. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She crawled into bed, stared at the ceiling, and whispered a quiet prayer that whatever was coming, she'd find a way through. For her mother, she had to. The morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Evelyn Carter's small Brooklyn apartment, but it brought no warmth. She woke with a heavy feeling in her chest, her mind still spinning from Claire's message the night before. Be at the restaurant at 9 a.m. We need to talk. That tone, brief and cold, promised nothing good. Evelyn lay in bed for a few more minutes, staring at the stained ceiling, trying to shake off the ominous feeling, but the worry clung to her like a shadow that wouldn't lift. She forced herself to sit up, brewed a cup of cheap coffee, and checked her phone. No new messages from May, only an email from the hospital reminding her about an unpaid bill, the number making her heart sink. Her mother, Margaret, had been readmitted just last week due to complications from chemotherapy. The doctors said her condition was stable, but in the world of cancer, stable never meant safe. Evelyn needed her job at Le Ciel now more than ever, not just for the salary, but for the generous tips from wealthy clients. She put on a gray sweater and jeans, trying to look presentable despite the turmoil inside. When she stepped outside, the October air in Manhattan was freezing, as if it cut right through her thin layers. She caught the subway to Midtown, silently observing the blank faces of fellow passengers. In her mind, she replayed last night's shift, trying to pinpoint what could have triggered Claire's summons. Did she spill a drink? Forget an order? Did a guest complain? No, she was sure she'd done everything right. Except the call from May. Her brow furrowed as she remembered those 10 stolen minutes in the kitchen hallway, speaking Mandarin to help May through customs. Had someone overheard? But even if they had, so what? LaCielle didn't ban personal calls during breaks, as long as they didn't disrupt service. And she'd been careful, kept her voice low, and returned to work immediately. So why had Claire's message sounded like a sentence being handed down? When Evelyn arrived at LaCielle at 8:55 a.m., the restaurant looked nothing like the glamorous scene from the night before. No golden lights, no clinking glasses, just cold white lighting and the sharp scent of floor cleaner. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the door. Claire was already waiting in the small office behind the bar, sitting behind a desk with a file folder in front of her. The usually warm manager now wore a stern expression, lips pressed tightly together. "Have a seat, Evelyn," Claire said, motioning to the chair across from her. Her voice was devoid of emotion. Evelyn sat down, hands clenched in her lap. "What's going on, Claire? Did I do something wrong?" Claire sighed and slid a piece of paper toward her. "This is your termination notice. Today is your last day at LaCielle." The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the chest. She blinked, trying to process. "Termination? Why? What did I do?" Claire looked away as if she couldn't bear to meet Evelyn's eyes. "This decision came from upper management. I'm not authorized to give details. You know LaCielle has very high standards, and sometimes some employees just aren't the right fit." "Not the right fit," Evelyn repeated, her voice rising more than she intended. "Claire, I've worked here for 3 years. I've never had a complaint, never broken protocol. If there's a problem, you need to tell me what it is." Claire shook her head, still avoiding eye contact. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. This wasn't my decision. You'll receive your paycheck for the month and a small severance package. Please sign here, and good luck." Evelyn stared at the paper, the words blurring before her eyes. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the wave of despair rising inside left her frozen. She signed her name with a trembling hand, then stood feeling as if the ground beneath her had collapsed. Claire said something about returning her uniform, but Evelyn barely heard it. She walked out of the office, her mind blank. In the dining room, a few co-workers cleaning tables glanced at her with a mix of curiosity and pity. They had obviously heard. Evelyn lowered her head, grabbed her bag, and rushed out of LaCielle, not wanting anyone to see the tears threatening to spill. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall, the cold drops landing on her hair and shoulders. She stood beneath an awning, breathing deeply, trying to keep from breaking apart. She thought of her mother, those long nights in the hospital, the weak smile she gave when Evelyn shared stories about quirky guests at the restaurant. How could she tell her mother she'd just lost her job? How would she pay for medicine, rent, food? She pulled out her phone, tempted to call May and vent, but remembered May was likely still dealing with the aftermath at the airport. In the end, Evelyn just stood there, rain soaking through her sweater, as helplessness gripped her chest like a vice. She started walking, with no destination in mind, just the need to get away from LaCielle. When she stopped at a newsstand to escape the rain, her eyes landed on a magazine cover. A sharp-featured man stared back at her under the headline, "Julian West, the man reshaping the future of tech." Her brow furrowed. She recognized that face. It was the man from the VIP table last night, the CEO of West Tech. The short article below mentioned his appearance at LaCielle, where he had hosted a private dinner for major partners. Evelyn skimmed the text, her heartbeat picking up. One line caught her eye, something about Julian West's sharp instincts for identifying risk. She remembered his gaze last night, the way he looked at her after she returned from the call. Could it be number? No way. A man like Julian West had no reason to notice a server like her, but the bad feeling refused to go away. She recalled her Mandarin conversation, the words shipment, customs clearance. If he overheard and misunderstood? She shook her head, telling herself she was overthinking, but the thought clung to her like a puzzle piece that wouldn't fit. She bought the magazine, stuffed it into her bag, and kept walking in the rain. When she got home, she collapsed onto the couch, utterly drained. Her phone buzzed, a message from the hospital informing her that her mother needed additional tests. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. At last, the tears came. She had no idea what to do next, but she knew one thing. That call last night, no matter how innocent, had changed everything. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Julian West sat in his office on the top floor of West Tech, looking out over the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He wasn't thinking much about the waitress from last night. The decision to fire her had been instinctual, a way to eliminate a potential risk. But when his assistant handed him the event summary, the name Evelyn Carter stood out among the listed staff. Julian frowned, an odd unease flickering in his chest. He pushed the report aside, telling himself it was nothing, just a small detail. But deep down, he knew he'd just set something in motion, something far bigger than he could have imagined. 3 days after being fired, Evelyn Carter stood in front of the mirror in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, squeezing herself into an old navy blue suit. It was slightly too tight, but it was the most professional thing she still owned from her grad school days. She tied her hair into a low bun, checked the documents in her hands, and took a deep breath. Today was a chance to start over. A job interview for a temporary interpreter, assistant at West Tech, a tech company she only knew from headlines. She wasn't sure she could compete, but after sending out dozens of resumes and receiving nothing but silence, she couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip. Her mother was still in the hospital, and with each passing day, the medical bills grew heavier on Evelyn's shoulders. She had spent the entire night reviewing her Mandarin and French, practicing interview answers to hide the desperation gnawing at her. "I can do this," she told herself, though the voice in her head trembled with doubt. She slipped the documents into her bag, checked her phone, no messages from May, just another reminder email from the hospital, and walked out the door. The West Tech Tower in Midtown Manhattan rose high into the sky, its glass facade glittering in the sun. Evelyn felt small as she entered the marble-floored lobby, its cold elegance a symbol of wealth and power. She presented her ID at the reception desk, received a visitor badge, and was directed to the 32nd floor where the HR department was conducting interviews. In the elevator, she silently recited her answers. "I have experience in freelance translation. I'm fluent in Mandarin and French, and I always ensure accuracy and confidentiality in my work." The waiting area outside the HR office was more crowded than she expected. Over a dozen applicants, most younger than her, sat in leather chairs, scrolling through phones or reviewing notes. Evelyn found a seat in the corner, opened her folder, and pretended to read. But her mind wandered back to Le Ciel. She still didn't understand why she'd been fired, and the thought that the Mandarin phone call might have had something to do with it still unsettled her. She shook her head and forced herself to focus. Today wasn't the time for the past. Evelyn Carter, a middle-aged woman with her hair in a tight bun and a gray blazer, appeared at the door. "Come with me." Evelyn stood, offered a small smile, and followed. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Nguyen, West Tech's head of human resources. The interview room was spacious, with windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Besides Sarah, 2 others sat behind the table, an older man with a friendly face, and Julian West. Evelyn froze for a second as she recognized him. The sharp features, the analytical eyes, the commanding presence. He was the man from the VIP table that night. She hadn't expected him to be here. Sure, West Tech was his company, but a CEO like him couldn't possibly have time to vet candidates for a temporary assistant position. Or did he? She quickly composed herself, maintained a professional smile, and took a seat. Julian didn't look at her at first, his eyes fixed on the folder in front of him, but she could feel the tension in the room. Sarah began the interview, asking about Evelyn's experience and skill set. She answered smoothly, describing her time as a graduate student at Columbia, her freelance translation projects, and her ability to navigate multilingual communication. The older man, who introduced himself as Tom, a project director, nodded, clearly impressed. But Julian remained silent, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, as if waiting for something. "Ms. Carter," Sarah said, glancing at her resume, "you've worked in high-pressure environments. This role requires extreme discretion, especially when handling sensitive information. Can you share how you maintain confidentiality?" Evelyn nodded, choosing her words carefully. "I always follow confidentiality protocols in every translation project. I understand that in tech, even a small mistake can have serious consequences. I double-check everything and never share information beyond the scope of the assignment." Sarah smiled, but Julian finally looked up, his gaze as sharp as a blade. You speak of confidentiality, he said in a low, cool tone. But how do we know you won't misuse your skills? For instance, using a language no one else in the room understands to exchange private information? The question struck like an arrow, and Evelyn's heart pounded. She didn't know exactly what Julian had overheard that night, but she was certain he was referring to the Mandarin phone call. She kept her voice even, though her nerves were frayed inside. Mr. West, I use language to assist, not to conceal. If I ever speak a language others don't understand, it's to serve the task. For example, helping a foreign partner understand the details. I have no reason to do otherwise. Julian gave a quiet, unreadable grunt. Sarah quickly shifted topics, asking about teamwork and flexibility, but Evelyn could still feel Julian's eyes on her, as if probing for a crack in her composure. When the interview ended, she shook hands with all three, thanked them, and left the room feeling both relieved and uneasy. In the executive meeting room on the top floor of West Tech, Julian sat across from Sarah, a list of candidates in his hand. The name Evelyn Carter was circled in red, with Sarah's note, outstanding candidate, ideal fit. Julian frowned and pushed the page away. We don't need her, he said curtly. There are dozens of qualified applicants. Sarah raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Julian, she was the best we saw today. Fluent in 2 languages, real-world experience, and her response to your question, very composed. We need a translator immediately for next week's French partnership project. She's a perfect match. Julian crossed his arms, his eyes darkening. She used to work at Le Ciel. I don't trust people who are careless. Sarah tilted her head, clearly confused. Careless? There's nothing unusual in her record. She left her graduate program for family reasons, not disciplinary. And what does Le Ciel have to do with anything? Julian didn't answer right away. He remembered Evelyn's voice echoing in that dark hallway, words like shipment and customs clearance ringing in his mind like a warning bell. He had ordered her termination, and now here she was, like a ghost from the past. But he couldn't tell Sarah that his judgment was based on a hunch, or worse, a lingering scar from the betrayal he'd suffered 3 years ago. 1 week trial, Tom, the project director, broke the silence. If she doesn't deliver, we replace her. But Sarah's right. We don't have many better options. Julian clenched his jaw but finally nodded. 1 week, no more. Evelyn stepped out of the West Tech Tower, unaware she had just crossed into dangerous territory. She had no idea Julian was behind her firing, and even less that he was now watching her from the 32nd floor window, suspicion written all over his face. But as she walked into the street, a sliver of hope stirred inside her. She had done well in the interview, and if hired, she might finally be able to care for her mother. With quiet determination, she vowed to prove her worth, no matter how coldly that man might look at her. Evelyn Carter approached her first day at West Tech with the cautious focus of someone walking a tightrope. She had received a confirmation email from Sarah Nguyen the night before. 1 week probation, starting Monday, as a temporary interpreter assistant. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a sliver of hope, at least enough to keep her mother's hospital bills under control for now. She wore the same navy blue suit, carried a small notebook and pen, and walked in determined to prove she wasn't just a good fit. She was irreplaceable. The 32nd floor of West Tech was far busier than it had been on interview day, with employees bustling through glass hallways, laptops and coffee cups in hand. Sarah greeted her in HR, handed her a temporary employee badge, and gave her a stack of documents to translate into French for an upcoming meeting with European partners. You'll be working directly with Tom's project team, Sarah said with a smile, but Julian may request your assistance as well. He's a little demanding, but don't take it personally. Evelyn nodded, but the mention of Julian West tightened her chest. She still remembered his piercing stare during the interview, his loaded question about confidentiality. She didn't know why he'd singled her out, but she told herself to keep everything professional and avoid any trouble. She was led to a small meeting room where Tom and a few engineers were discussing a new AI system. The work started smoothly. She translated technical documents, jotted down industry-specific terminology, and even suggested a more precise phrasing in French. Tom was clearly pleased, and the engineers started calling her a lifesaver after she corrected a mistranslated section of the draft. And then Julian walked in. He entered mid-morning, unannounced, radiating a presence that brought the entire room to silence. He wore a charcoal gray suit, no tie, but exuded effortless authority. "Tom, how's the progress?" he asked, his voice deep and sharp. Tom quickly launched into an update, while Evelyn sat at the corner of the table, quietly working on a paragraph. She felt Julian's eyes sweep over her, but didn't look up, staying focused as if he weren't even there. After hearing the report, Julian suddenly turned to her. "Ms. Carter, this translation—" He tapped the document she just completed. "Are you sure scalability is the correct term in this context?" Evelyn blinked, surprised but unfazed. "Yes, Mr. West. In the context of AI systems, scalability is the standard term in French for scalability. Using extensibility could confuse our technical partners." Julian studied her for a moment, as if gauging whether she was bluffing or genuinely competent. Finally, he gave a slight nod. "Good, carry on." He left the room as abruptly as he'd entered, leaving behind a tense silence. Tom leaned toward her and whispered, "Don't worry, that's just how he is. If he doesn't object, it means you passed." But Evelyn didn't feel relieved. There was something in the way Julian looked at her, not just suspicion, but a deeper wariness, like she was a riddle he hadn't solved yet. She began to notice him more throughout the day, not because she wanted to, but because he always seemed to be where she was working. In meetings, he scrutinized every detail, firing sharp questions that left engineers scrambling. In the hallways, he walked alone, never chatting, his gaze always fixed ahead. He was undeniably brilliant. His insights into the project revealed a mind that anticipated problems before they even emerged. But he was also solitary, like an island in a sea of people. At lunch, Evelyn sat alone in the break room, scrolling through her phone for hospital updates. A friendly young software engineer, Mason, sat beside her and handed her a can of soda. "You okay?" he asked. "Getting grilled by Julian on day one? That's rough." She offered a faint smile. "It's fine. He just seems intense." Mason chuckled. "That's putting it lightly. Julian used to be different, you know? More open, even kind of funny. But after the thing with the Chinese company, he changed." Evelyn looked up, curious. "What thing?" Mason lowered his voice as if wary of being overheard. 3 years ago, Westech partnered with a tech firm in Beijing. Julian trusted them. He even considered the CEO a close friend. But they stole Westech's AI data and sold it to a competitor. The company lost $200 million. Julian lost his trust in everyone. Ever since then, he's been hypersensitive about anything related to China. Language, people, all of it. Evelyn's heart sank. She immediately recalled her Mandarin phone call at Le Ciel and Julian's expression when she returned to the table. "So you mean he's suspicious of anyone who speaks Mandarin?" Mason shrugged. "Sort of. I don't think it's personal. It's just, he's haunted by betrayal. If he knows you speak Mandarin, be careful." Evelyn nodded, but deep down, a puzzle piece clicked into place. Her firing didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. If Julian had been at Le Ciel, if he overheard her call and misunderstood, everything suddenly made sense. She had no proof, but the thought that she was punished because of his past pain left her both angry and sad. That afternoon, Evelyn was called to Julian's office to help translate a short email from a French partner. His office was spacious and minimalist, with a floor-to-ceiling window wall. Julian sat behind his desk, eyes glued to his laptop. "Ms. Carter," he said without looking up, "this email needs to be translated precisely. No mistakes. Can you handle that?" "Yes, Mr. West," she replied calmly. She took the document, sat down across from him, and began translating, ignoring the feeling of being watched. When she handed him the finished draft, Julian skimmed it, then suddenly asked, "Where did you learn Mandarin?" The question caught her off guard, but she kept her composure. "I studied it in university and continued on my own. I also lived in Beijing for a year as part of an exchange program." He looked at her, his gaze intense, as if searching for a lie. "Beijing," he repeated softly. "Interesting." Evelyn didn't respond, but she could feel the suspicion in his voice. She stood, asked to be excused, and as she shut the office door behind her, she heard him murmur, more to himself than to her, "Better safe than sorry." Back at her desk, Evelyn couldn't shake the realization that Julian West wasn't just a cold CEO. He was a man wounded, and his pain had turned her into collateral damage. She gripped her pen tightly, a fire rising in her chest. She wouldn't let him push her out of Westech the way he had at Le Ciel. If he doubted her, she would prove him wrong, by being better than anyone else. In his office, Julian closed his laptop and stared out the window. The name Evelyn Carter echoed in his mind like a question without an answer. He didn't want to admit it, but she was good. Too good. And that made him wary. He had trusted the wrong person once before, and the cost had been too high. He would watch her, just for this week, and if she gave even the slightest reason to doubt, he would make sure she was gone from Westech. For good. Evelyn Carter sat at her small desk, tucked into the corner of Westech's office, the glow from her laptop screen lighting her face. It was the third day of her probation week, and she felt as if she were walking across a minefield. The translation work had gone smoothly. She'd completed French documents and supported the engineering team with technical terminology. But Julian West's watchful eyes still left her unsettled. After their brief conversation in his office the day before, she was more certain than ever that he suspected her because of the Mandarin phone call back at Le Ciel. And if Mason was right about Julian's past, that suspicion wasn't personal. It had already cost her one job. She couldn't let it happen again. If Julian continued to view her as a threat, her trial period might end without any explanation, just like it did at Le Ciel. She needed proof to clear her name, and that thought led her to one person, Lucas, a tech staffer at Le Ciel, who had helped her several times when the POS system glitched. Lucas was a quiet guy, about 25, always wearing headphones and preferring to work alone in the back tech room. He and Evelyn had built a friendly rapport through brief chats during breaks. She'd often bring him coffee when shifts ran long. If anyone could access Le Ciel's security cameras, it was him. During lunch, when the office was quieter, Evelyn pulled out her phone and texted him, "Lucas, it's Evie. Can you help me with something? I need to see the security footage from last Friday night, around the hallway near the kitchen. It's important." She bit her lip, waiting. A few minutes later, the message showed "seen," and Lucas replied, "What's going on? I can try, but management doesn't like staff pulling footage. It's risky." Evelyn hesitated, but she had no other option. "I know it's a big ask, but I think I was fired over a misunderstanding from that shift. Please, Lucas, I only need a short clip." After a pause, he responded, "Okay, I'll try after my shift tonight. Send me the exact time, and I'll look for the footage." Evelyn exhaled with relief and quickly sent him the time frame, around 9:30 p.m., near the kitchen hallway. A sliver of hope crept in, though anxiety still lingered. If the footage didn't show what she needed, or if Lucas got caught, it could all backfire. She slid her phone back into her pocket and returned to her translation, forcing herself to concentrate. That night near midnight, Evelyn received an email from Lucas. He'd attached a video file and a brief note. "This is what you asked for. Kitchen hallway, 9:28 to 9:40 p.m., last Friday. I erased the access logs, but don't tell anyone. Good luck." She opened her laptop, heart pounding, and downloaded the clip. The footage was a little grainy, but clear enough to show the narrow hallway leading to Le Ciel's kitchen. She watched herself in her black uniform leaning against the wall, phone to her ear. The audio wasn't crisp, but her voice came through, speaking Mandarin, calmly translating May's words to the customs officer. She replayed it, hearing her explain the art shipment, mention the visa, and politely ask for leniency. There was nothing shady, nothing secretive, just someone helping a friend in trouble. Evelyn watched the clip twice more, ensuring she hadn't missed anything. Relief washed over her, but it was accompanied by a slow-burning anger. If Julian had overheard that call and misunderstood, then he wasn't just wrong. He had upended her life based on a snap judgment. She copied the video onto a USB drive and made a decision. She would give it to Julian, not to apologize, not to beg, but to show him the truth. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at Westech earlier than usual. She wore a crisp white blouse and black slacks, trying to project calm even as nerves twisted inside her. Giving Julian the video was a gamble. He might take it as a challenge or worse, dismiss it. But she couldn't keep letting him see her as a threat and do nothing. At 8:30 a.m., after confirming with Sarah that Julian was in, Evelyn knocked on his office door. He sat behind his desk, reviewing a chart on his screen. When he looked up, his eyes were as cold as ever. "Ms. Carter," he said in his deep voice, "what is it?" Evelyn drew a breath, stepped forward, and placed the USB drive on his desk. "Mr. West, I believe there's been a misunderstanding about something that happened at Le Ciel. This is the surveillance footage from the night I took a Mandarin phone call. I'd like you to watch it." Julian frowned, clearly not expecting this. He picked up the USB and turned it over in his hand, as if weighing his options. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his tone tinged with skepticism. "You think I have time for this?" "I hope you'll make time," Evelyn said steadily. "If you've been doubting me, then I want you to see the truth. I didn't do anything wrong." He stared at her, his eyes dark and searching, as if trying to spot a lie. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. "Fine, I'll watch it. Now get back to work." Evelyn nodded and left the office, her heart still racing. She didn't know if Julian would watch the video or toss it in the trash, but she had done what she needed to do. In his office, Julian inserted the USB into his laptop, suspicion still clouding his face. He didn't want to admit it, but Evelyn's quiet defiance intrigued him. He played the video and watched the faint images from Le Ciel's hallway. Her voice, speaking Mandarin, was clear and controlled. He understood enough of the language to grasp the nature of the call. She was interpreting a conversation with customs. There were no secrets, no conspiracies, just a woman trying to help a friend. Julian replayed the clip, listening to every word. A knot twisted in his stomach, not because of Evelyn, but because of himself. He remembered that night, remembered ordering her termination without hesitation. He had let the scars of a past betrayal cloud his judgment, and now the truth stared him in the face. He shut the laptop and looked out the window, the Manhattan skyline sprawling below. For the first time in years, a flicker of guilt stirred in him. Evelyn wasn't a threat. She had been a casualty of his misplaced fear. He picked up his phone, intending to call Sarah and extend Evelyn's trial, but paused. He needed time to process this, to confront what he'd done. When Evelyn returned to her desk later that day, she found a short email from Julian. "Thank you for the video. We'll talk later." No apology, no explanation. But there was a shift in his tone, something less rigid, less cold. She tucked her laptop into her bag and left West Tech, unaware that her action today hadn't just cleared Julian's doubts, it had made him begin to see her in an entirely new light. Evelyn Carter stepped into her second week at West Tech with a completely different mindset. Since giving the surveillance footage to Julian West, she'd noticed a subtle shift in how he treated her. The sharp questions and suspicious stares had faded, replaced by more direct and purposeful assignments. Almost as if he was now testing her capabilities rather than doubting her presence. She was assigned to assist with international negotiations, a role that required not only linguistic skills but emotional intelligence. Evelyn didn't just meet expectations, she exceeded them. And for the first time, she began to feel like she belonged here, even if only temporarily. Today, she sat in the 32nd floor conference room, preparing to live translate a video call with Nextech, a French tech company. Julian led the meeting, his voice low and assertive as he discussed collaboration on a new AI development system. Evelyn translated the words of Pierre Dubois, Nextech's CEO, an older man with a polished, restrained demeanor. She not only delivered an accurate translation, but subtly softened tense moments during pricing disputes. When Pierre mentioned a vague contract clause, Evelyn leaned toward Julian and quietly suggested, "Emphasize West Tech's long-term benefits," to deflect. Julian nodded, applied it instantly, and the negotiation ended with a preliminary deal worth tens of millions. After the call, Tom, the project director, clapped her on the shoulder. "Ms. Carter, you just saved the team. Pierre is notoriously hard to sway." Evelyn smiled modestly, but her eyes inadvertently met Julian's from across the room. He didn't speak, just gave a small nod. But in that brief glance, something new flickered behind his eyes. Respect, perhaps. In the following days, Julian entrusted Evelyn with increasingly sensitive work. She translated complex contracts, participated in meetings with Asian partners, and even proposed alternative phrasing to persuade a Chinese firm to extend their partnership. Her skill wasn't just in language, but in reading people, something Julian, for all his intelligence and control, often lacked. He began to see Evelyn in a new light. Not just a translator, but someone sincere, competent, and unexpectedly sharp. In rare moments, when she laughed with coworkers or patiently explained terminology to Mason, one of the company's junior techs, Julian saw a warmth in her he hadn't witnessed in a long time. Yet despite the improving dynamic between them, Evelyn kept her guard up. She knew Julian's past, the betrayal by a Chinese firm, the trust that had left him scarred. She also suspected he had been the one to orchestrate her firing at Luciel, though he'd never confirmed it. That truth made her wary, even as her heart fluttered at times when she glimpsed his loneliness. Like when he sat alone in his office, staring at the Manhattan skyline with distant eyes. One afternoon, while translating a series of internal emails from French, Evelyn stumbled upon something strange. The email was sent from an anonymous account to West Tech's CFO, Diane Reynolds. On the surface, it looked like a financial report, but between the lines, Evelyn spotted terminology that didn't match the ongoing projects: off-market transactions, stock adjustment, and foreign investment fund. She frowned and reread the message. A French phrase, transfert discreet, was repeated multiple times, implying covert money transfers. Evelyn wasn't a financial expert, but her instincts told her this wasn't just a standard email. She saved the translation, printed a hard copy, and brought it to Julian's office. He was reviewing market charts when she knocked. He looked up as she entered, his tone still calm but no longer icy. "Ms. Carter," he said, "something important?" She placed the printout on his desk, pointing to the highlighted lines. "I translated this from the internal system. It was addressed to Ms. Reynolds, but the content, it's unusual. I think it might point to a scheme involving stock manipulation, possibly linked to an outside partner." Julian took the paper, skimming it at an impressive speed. His expression darkened, eyes sharp as steel. "Are you sure you didn't mistranslate?" he asked, voice tense. "I triple-checked," Evelyn said evenly. "I'm no finance expert, but terms like covert transaction and stock adjustment don't show up in normal reports, and this came from an untraceable account." Julian fell silent, fingers tightening around the paper. He knew Diane Reynolds was a powerful figure at West Tech, but he'd never fully trusted her. If the email was legitimate, it could signal an internal conspiracy, an attack reminiscent of the betrayal 3 years ago. But this time, he wasn't alone. "Keep this to yourself," he said, locking eyes with her. "Tell no one. Not Sarah, not Tom. Understand?" Evelyn nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I understand. But if this is real, what do we do next?" Julian stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "We investigate, quietly. If Diane is involved, she's not acting alone. And if they find out you uncovered this," he paused, his voice low, "you'll be in danger." Evelyn swallowed hard but didn't flinch. "I'll do what's necessary. Just tell me what you need from me." Julian turned back, his gaze laced with surprise and something else. Admiration. "You're not afraid, Carter?" She gave a faint smile, though her pulse thundered. "I'm afraid, but I've lost too much already to back down now." In the days that followed, Julian and Evelyn launched a covert investigation. Julian instructed her to continue translating internal messages, watching for more clues, while he quietly examined Diane's trading history and her communications with foreign investors. They worked in silence, pretending everything was normal. In meetings, Evelyn remained professional, her translations flawless, while Julian maintained his signature stoicism. But after hours, they stayed late in the office, cross-referencing data and sharing theories. One evening, while they sat in an empty conference room, Julian suddenly said, "You remind me of someone I once trusted, and who betrayed me." He paused as if regretting the admission. "But you're different. You don't hide anything. Evelyn looked at him, surprised by the rare vulnerability. I have nothing to hide, Mr. West. I just want to do what's right. He nodded, his voice softening. Call me Julian. She smiled for the first time, feeling a thin, fragile thread forming between them. Something real. But she also knew, in this dangerous game, they weren't just fighting invisible enemies. They were facing their own old wounds. And if they weren't careful, this conspiracy could destroy everything. Rain poured down over Manhattan, turning the streets into glimmering rivers of neon light. Evelyn Carter ran across the underground parking garage of West Tech, her heart pounding, breath ragged. Just minutes earlier, she and Julian had narrowly escaped a moment that left her blood running cold. They had been leaving the office after another late-night session, digging through evidence of the stock manipulation scheme, when a black SUV suddenly tore around a blind corner of the garage. Julian, reacting in a flash, had pulled her behind a concrete pillar just in time. The vehicle sped past, missing them by inches. The driver didn't stop, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Evelyn shaking with shock. Are you okay? Julian asked, his voice low but urgent, his hand still gripping her arm. In the dim light of the garage, his face was tense, eyes scanning the area like he expected the danger to return at any second. Evelyn nodded, but her legs felt weak beneath her. She couldn't speak, her mind still spinning from the image of that SUV barreling toward them. This hadn't been an accident. Someone had meant to send a message. And deep down, she knew it was tied to the email she had discovered, to the secret investigation she and Julian had been conducting. I'm fine, she whispered, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. Julian looked at her, his gaze softening slightly. Get in, I'll take you home. She didn't protest. They moved quickly to Julian's black Audi, the rain soaking their coats. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the pounding rain on the windshield and the steady hum of the engine. Evelyn hugged herself, trying to shake the lingering fear, but it clung to her like a shadow. Julian drove in silence, but she noticed the white-knuckle grip he had on the steering wheel. When they arrived at the aging apartment building in Brooklyn where Evelyn lived, the rain hadn't let up. She opened the car door, ready to step out, then paused, turning back to him. Thank you for pulling me out of the way, she said softly, sincerely. Would you like to come up for a cup of tea, just to calm down? Julian hesitated, his gaze drifting across her face, as if weighing something. Then he nodded. All right. Her apartment was small, filled with old furniture and family photos on the walls. She turned on the lights, set the kettle on the stove, and gestured for him to take a seat on the worn sofa. He looked out of place here, his expensive suit a sharp contrast against the faded rug. Evelyn brewed 2 cups of chamomile tea, the calming scent filling the space, and sat down across from him. They sat in silence for a while, the rain tapping softly on the window. Then Julian spoke, his voice deep and slightly hoarse. Tonight, I shouldn't have kept you so late. If I'd been more careful, that wouldn't have happened. Evelyn shook her head. It wasn't your fault. We had no way of knowing they'd go that far. He looked at her, regret flickering in his eyes. Evelyn, I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for everything. For Lucielle, for doubting you, for making you lose your job. I let the past control me. She blinked, surprised by his honesty. The past? You mean the betrayal? Julian nodded, his hands tightening around the tea mug. He told her the story, his voice steady but filled with emotion, about the deal with the Chinese firm 3 years ago, about the friend he had trusted like family, who had stolen West Tech's AI data and sold it, about the $200 million loss, about the trust that was shattered. I thought I was protecting myself, he said, but all I did was build walls. And you got caught in the fallout. Evelyn listened, her chest aching. She understood loss. She knew what it was to give up everything for someone you love. I gave things up too, she said quietly. I used to dream of being a language professor, living in Paris or Beijing, teaching, writing, living a quiet life. But when my mom got cancer, I gave it all up. My scholarship, my research, everything. Now I just try to keep her here with me as long as I can. Julian looked at her, his expression gentler than she had ever seen. "You're stronger than I thought, Evelyn. I haven't trusted anyone in years, until I met you." The words pierced her, painful and beautiful all at once. Her eyes stung, but she didn't look away. She reached out, placing her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin. "I'm scared too, Julian, but I believe we can get through this together." He looked at her hand, then met her gaze. For a moment, time seemed to stop. He leaned in, and so did she, as if pulled by something neither could resist. Their lips met in a kiss that was both soft and urgent, as if they were both searching for something to hold on to in the storm. The kiss deepened, filled with unspoken fear, hope, and a connection stronger than either of them had expected. When they pulled away, Evelyn was breathless, her cheeks flushed. Julian smiled, the first real smile she had ever seen from him. But then his expression grew serious again. "We're not safe yet, Evelyn. Tonight was a warning. I'll protect you, I swear it." She gripped his hand tighter and nodded. "I know, and I'm not backing down." Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much. The ambush in the parking garage had changed everything. Julian and Evelyn now knew that the person behind the stock manipulation scheme wasn't just operating in the shadows. They were willing to do anything to protect their secrets. But instead of backing down, the two of them decided to move faster. They had to unmask the traitor before another attack came. Julian called Evelyn into his office the next morning, closed the door, and pulled the blinds shut to ensure no one could listen in. "We need to act quickly," he said, voice low but firm. "If Diane Reynolds is involved, she has allies on the executive team. We need a trap." Evelyn nodded, already mentally prepared. "What kind of trap? How do we expose who's pulling the strings?" Julian gave a faint, sharp smile. "We'll leak false information, something sensitive enough to force the traitor's hand. I'll send out an internal email claiming we've discovered suspicious transactions and are launching an investigation. But I'll include one deliberate false detail, and only a few people will receive it. Whoever acts on that fake detail, that's our mole." Evelyn was impressed by the strategy's precision, but didn't hesitate to agree. Together, they drafted the email, inserting a fake reference to a Swiss investment fund that didn't exist. They sent it to 3 key suspects: Diane Reynolds, the chief operating officer, and a senior financial advisor. Evelyn translated the message into French to simulate that it had also been sent to an international partner, adding realism to the deception. Over the next 2 days, they waited, pretending nothing had changed. Evelyn kept translating documents and attending meetings, while Julian monitored every financial transaction through a secure surveillance system. The tension made it hard to sleep, but whenever Evelyn looked at Julian, she found the strength to keep going. He was no longer the cold, untouchable CEO she once feared. He was her partner, someone willing to stand in harm's way for her. By the 3rd day the trap had sprung, Julian received an alert from the cybersecurity team. An anonymous account had attempted to move a large volume of Westtech shares through an investment fund in Geneva, the exact detail planted in the fake email. Julian immediately traced the digital fingerprints, and all signs pointed directly to Diane Reynolds. But they needed irrefutable evidence. Julian installed an audio surveillance device in the boardroom where Diane often met with advisors. Evelyn, fluent in French, was tasked with analyzing a voicemail Diane had left during a call with a foreign contact. She sat in Julian's office, headphones on, listening intently. Diane's voice, calm but calculated, revealed plans to sell insider information to a French hedge fund in exchange for an enormous commission. Evelyn transcribed and translated every word, her notes meticulous. When she finished, she handed the report to Julian. "This is the key," she said confidently. "She's not just manipulating stocks. She's planning to crash Westtech's value for personal gain." Julian read the document, his eyes blazing with focus. "You did great, Evelyn. Now we finish this." They called an emergency board meeting under the pretense of addressing a financial crisis. When Diane walked in, calm and composed as always, Julian played the recording. Her voice echoed through the room, unmistakable. Her face paled, but she still tried to deny it, until Julian presented the forged transaction data and traced IP logs. The rest of the board sat in stunned silence. And then, without further discussion, Diane was escorted out by security, pending a full legal investigation. After the meeting, Julian turned to Evelyn, gratitude softening his usually guarded expression. "You didn't just save the company, Evelyn. You saved me, again." She smiled, though her heart remained heavy. They had won, but the cost of victory was another scar, another weight carried between them, and a question hung unspoken in the air. Were they finally safe, or was this just the beginning? Camera flashes exploded outside Westech's headquarters, turning Friday afternoon's press conference into a chaotic media spectacle. Julian West stood at the podium in a deep navy suit, his voice calm and commanding as it echoed through the microphone, announcing the company's triumph over an internal stock manipulation scheme. Headlines had flooded the internet all morning. Westech turns the tables, CFO arrested for insider trading. Julian West saves company from collapse. But what stunned the crowd most was the moment Julian mentioned an unexpected name. "I want to thank someone who played a crucial role in uncovering this scheme," Julian said, his gaze sweeping over the press. "She's a temporary employee, someone who never sought recognition, but her intelligence and dedication saved Westech. Evelyn Carter, she's the real hero." Applause broke out, but Evelyn, standing off to the side of the room, felt her chest tighten. She had no desire to be in the spotlight. When Julian gestured for her to step forward, she offered only a faint smile, shook her head slightly, and stepped back. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back, trying to disappear into the crowd of employees. But the reporters noticed. Cameras turned toward her, and within minutes, her name was splashed across online articles. Evelyn Carter, the mystery woman behind Westech's victory. After the press conference, Westech's office buzzed with congratulations and curiosity. Co-workers surrounded Evelyn, Tom, Mason, and others, eager to ask about her role in the investigation. She gave short answers, thanked them politely, but inside all she wanted was to leave. The attention felt suffocating. She had done the right thing, uncovered the email, translated the incriminating recording, helped Julian expose Diane Reynolds. But she never wanted to be the center of anything. All she wished for was to return to her mother and live a quiet life, far from schemes and danger. That afternoon, Julian found her in the break room, sitting alone with a cold cup of tea. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes softer than usual. "Hiding out in here?" he asked with a hint of teasing. Evelyn offered a weak smile. "I'm not great with crowds, and I don't want to be seen as a hero. I was just doing my job." Julian sat across from her, his gaze sincere. "You did more than that, Evelyn. You saved the company, and maybe me too. I want you to know I'm grateful." She looked at him, feeling the weight in his voice, but she also felt a distance, not between them, but between the life she longed for and the world he inhabited. "Thank you, Julian, but I need time to think. About staying here. About everything." He nodded, not surprised, though his eyes dimmed slightly. "I understand, but before you decide, I'd like to do one thing. Would you let me come with you to visit your mother? I'd like to meet the woman who raised someone like you." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, she'd like that." That evening, Julian drove Evelyn to St. Luke's Hospital, where her mother, Margaret, was receiving treatment. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp, filled with the scent of earth and grass. In the hospital room, Margaret lay in bed, her silver hair thin, but her eyes lit up when she saw Evelyn. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice weak but warm, "you're earlier than I expected." Evelyn took her hand and smiled. "I wanted you to meet someone. This is Julian West, my boss." Julian stepped forward and bowed slightly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am. I've heard so much about you from Evelyn." Margaret studied him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "So you're the one keeping my daughter at the office late? But you seem all right. Sit down." They chatted, and to Evelyn's surprise, Julian was more open than she'd ever seen him. He spoke about Westech, the early startup days, and even cracked a joke about nearly burning down his kitchen while trying to cook. Margaret laughed heartily, and for a rare moment, Evelyn felt light. She watched Julian and felt grateful. He wasn't just the powerful CEO everyone feared. He was someone willing to step into her small world, just to bring her mother joy. As they left the hospital, Evelyn and Julian stood in the parking lot, the moon casting their shadows long across the pavement. She turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "Julian, I think I'm going to leave West Tech when my contract ends. I need to be with my mom. I need a simpler life." Julian was silent for a moment, studying her as if memorizing every detail of her face. "I won't try to stop you, Evelyn. You deserve to live the life you want. But if you ever change your mind, West Tech will always have a place for you." She smiled, eyes stinging with emotion. "Thank you for everything." He stepped closer, gently touching her shoulder, his eyes filled with words he didn't say. "You changed me, Evelyn. Don't forget that." They parted in silence, but as Evelyn stepped into the hospital elevator to return to her mother, she felt a sweet ache in her chest. Julian hadn't asked her to stay, but the look he gave her, deep, tender, and full of longing, was a promise that their story wasn't over. In the days that followed, the media continued to mention Evelyn, but she declined all interviews. She returned to her Brooklyn apartment, spending her days with her mother, reading aloud and sharing lighthearted stories from West Tech. But every night, when she sat alone, her thoughts drifted to Julian. The kiss in the rain, the look in his eyes at the hospital, and the loneliness he masked behind that calm exterior. She knew she had made the right choice, but part of her still lingered at West Tech, as if she'd left a piece of herself behind. And Julian, in his office high above Manhattan, couldn't stop thinking about her either. He reread the last translation Evelyn had left behind, her handwriting neat, her phrasing precise. He knew she needed time and space, and he respected that. But as he stared out over the city skyline, he made himself a quiet vow. One day he would find her again, not to bring her back, but to say everything he hadn't had the chance to say. A month had passed since Evelyn Carter left West Tech, and Manhattan had shifted with the season. The cold November wind swept through Brooklyn, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and hints of the approaching holidays. Evelyn spent most of her time with her mother, Margaret, who had been discharged from the hospital and was now undergoing outpatient care. Her health had gradually stabilized, though she still required regular attention. Evelyn had taken a part-time job at a local library, shelving books and helping children learn to read. The work wasn't glamorous, but it gave her the peace she had longed for after the whirlwind days at West Tech. Still, in quiet moments, sitting by the window of her small apartment, watching the rain fall, Evelyn couldn't help but think of Julian West, the kiss in the rain, the look in his eyes when they parted at the hospital, and the words he'd said, "You changed me, Evelyn," lingered in her memory. She often wondered how he was, if he still sat alone in that high-rise office, or if he had somehow found a way to heal the wounds of the past. She hadn't reached out, not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid that doing so would pull them both back into a world she'd fought to step away from. But fate, as always, had its own plans. One afternoon, Evelyn received an email from Sarah Nguyen, the HR director at West Tech. The subject line was simple: invitation to grand opening event. The message explained that West Tech was launching a new branch in San Francisco, and the leadership team wanted Evelyn to speak on the power of language in building trust. Evelyn frowned, scrolling through the message. She had left West Tech. She had turned away from the spotlight. Why were they inviting her now? She called her mother to tell her about the email. Margaret, sitting in her armchair knitting, smiled knowingly. "Sweetheart, maybe they don't just want to hear about language. Maybe someone there misses you." Evelyn blushed, shaking her head. "Mom, I don't think that's it. Julian, he has the whole world on his plate. He doesn't have time for me." Margaret raised an eyebrow, her eyes gleaming. "Then go. Find out for yourself. You've got nothing to lose." After a few days of thought, Evelyn agreed to attend. She told herself it was a chance to close the West Tech chapter properly, to thank people like Sarah and Tom, and to face Julian one last time, if he happened to be there. The event was held at a grand conference center in Manhattan, lit in warm golden tones, with giant screens flashing the West Tech logo. Evelyn wore a knee-length teal silk dress, simple but elegant, highlighting her natural beauty. As she stepped into the hall, she felt the eyes of hundreds, West employees, partners, and press. She kept her composure, offering polite smiles as Sarah welcomed her and guided her to the VIP section. The evening began with a speech from Tom, now director of the new branch. He spoke about West vision, innovation, and the power of trust. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She stepped up to the podium, heart pounding, but her voice rang clear as she spoke of how language connects people, dissolves suspicion, and builds lasting relationships. Language isn't just words, she said. It's sincerity. When we speak with truth, we build trust, and trust is the foundation of every lasting success. Applause erupted as she concluded. She stepped off the stage, relieved, until she saw him. Julian West stood at the back of the hall, his eyes locked on hers. He wore a black suit, still exuding quiet power, but something about him had changed. Softer, closer. He approached her, and before she could say a word, he held out a bouquet of white daisies, her favorite flower. "Evelyn," he said, voice low and warm, "you were right. Language is sincerity, and there's something I want to say to you, sincerely, in front of everyone." Evelyn blinked, her heart racing. The room fell quiet, all eyes on them. Julian took a deep breath, never looking away from her. "That phone call in Mandarin nearly drove us apart. But in the end, it led me to you, the woman who made me believe in the future again, who made me believe in love." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. Julian stepped closer and pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple, glimmering ring. "Evelyn Carter, I can't promise you the whole world, but I promise to spend my whole world making you happy. Will you let me be a part of your peaceful one?" Cheers and applause erupted around them, but Evelyn heard nothing except the thudding of her own heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she smiled through them and nodded. "Yes, Julian, I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, drew her into his arms, and they kissed amid the thunder of clapping. The kiss wasn't just a promise, it was healing, for his old scars, for her losses, and for a future they would now build together. Later that night, Evelyn and Julian stood on a balcony overlooking the city, glittering in the glow of thousands of lights. She leaned against his shoulder, warmed by his presence. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think we'd never get past the past." Julian kissed her forehead, smiling. "But we did. Because of you, I learned to believe again." They stood in silence, hand in hand, gazing at the skyline. Their story had begun with a misunderstanding, a Mandarin phone call in a crowded restaurant. But now it had become a new journey, one of love, trust, and the happiness that lay ahead.